Hi, everyone. Very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just a quick check. Is my screen visible to all of you?
Yes, Harsha.
Yeah, thank you, Shefali. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today, guys. Before moving ahead, I'd like to introduce our panelists first. So we have Aruna Venkatachalam, the Chief of Leaders Lab at Societal Platform. She has an experience for over 27 years across various sectors, and as a passion project, she runs various workshops for women as well. So the next panelist is Ratish Balakrishnan, the co-founder and managing partner at Sattva Consulting. He has an experience across a various range of sectors like education and skill development. He has also contributed at both state and national level policy discussions across some of these sectors. Next is Neeraj Tudamani, the Chief Strategy Officer at Shiksha Lokam, which is an NGO enabling leadership development opportunities for individual and institution in K-12 domain. And Neeraj is here responsible for driving the organization's growth. And our moderator for this session today, Gaurav Gupta, who is a Chief Growth Officer at EkStep Foundation. He has an experience for over 20 years and held leadership positions in Flipkart, Accenture, and Marketex. So I'd like to invite Gaurav now to take over from here. Over to you, Gaurav.
Right. Thank you, Harsha. A very good evening to everyone, including the panelists as well as all the attendees who have come in. First and foremost, thank you so much for making time. I think a lot is happening, and especially on a Friday evening, on the back of Republic Day, for everyone to turn up and make time, that itself speaks volumes about our passion for what we are doing. So thank you so much, everyone, for doing that. Before I go around the table, I just wanted to give a quick context around Skill-a-thon, which is an initiative, and then probably I go around the panel asking a few questions in that context. And towards the end, we'll also take some questions from the attendees for the panel. So Skill-a-thon as such, is an initiative by EkStep Foundation and the DSEP community towards identifying, solutions which can solve challenges around discovery and of opportunities, as well as, how trust can come through by virtue of credentials in the context of both skilling and education. It's an initiative which has been organized in partnership with ONDC and NDR. Which are both government initiatives around digital commerce and towards having an open architecture for the ecosystem in the context of skilling and education. As a part of that Skill-a-thon, there will be different teams that will be participating in it in terms of picking up challenges around discovery of opportunities and around increasing trust in the context of skilling and education. And around that, they will be hacking and developing certain solutions and prototypes, which will then be screened by a set of experts from the industry. So every participant gets a chance to run these initiatives through some of these experts who can give their opinion and feedback to them to help them fine tune it. And the finalists will get a chance to present their solutions to none other than Mr. Nandan Nilekani. And of course, on the back of it, there is also a prizes of up to rupees 16 lakhs, total prizes worth rupees 16 lakhs. So it's a combination of all of these things that will unfold over the next few days. In fact, the hackathon at the moment, we are inviting registrations for that, and formally it will get kicked off around 13th of February. So as a prelude to that, this is our first conversation in the series with this panel of experts coming from different sectors across skilling and education, and especially looking at highlighting some of the challenges and opportunities in this space when it comes to discovery of opportunities and around building trust through better credentials. This, of course, is a panel with a lot of experience behind it, and especially now looking at it with the lens of how the social sector can benefit from it. Right. So with that, and without taking too much time any further, I would like to open it up for the panel to walk us through some of their experiences, or what is their take around something like this, which is about how better discovery of opportunities from their experience, and some of the challenges around it in terms of what they see across skilling, livelihoods, and education as a space. Aruna, why don't we start with you?
Thank you so much, Gaurav, for that context setting. And hey, hi, Ratish. How are you? Hi, Neeraj. My experience coming into this is that I have worked I used to work for the inclusion financing and MSME spaces in India for about 7-8 years, actually. And currently, I also take care of the livelihood domain at Society Platform, which focuses a lot on, when we're talking about livelihood, skilling becomes a very essential part of that, actually. So before sort of getting deeper into what are the challenges and what are the opportunities, I think maybe I can start with giving a little bit of context on what is the size of the problem, or even the size of the opportunity that we are looking at, actually. So I think 2015, I think even in 2020, took the same report that National Skilling Development Mission came out with. They said that the goal is to train 550 million people in India, actually. And then if you see that in the context of 54% of India being less than 25 years old, the number of people who needs to train, and also I think a lot of us would be somewhat familiar that, percentages up and down maybe, but the understanding is that maybe about 3% of the Indian population has been formally skilled, as against, Germany, which is about 75%, and some other countries which may be at anywhere between above 50%, actually. So this is the background in which sort of we have to think about, I think, what does it mean to skill, and what are the problems that today that kind of exists, actually, right? So we do work with a couple of organizations in India in the livelihood space very deeply, who are doing a lot of skilling in India Mission, as well as we are also working with somebody in South Africa. But I think largely the problems I would say that we are looking at it is, apart from the discoverability that the Skill-a-thon calls out as an important problem, and the accreditation, I think there is a level of a demand versus supply mismatch in terms of skilling, right? I mean, there is a set of skilling that happens, but then does that really match what the organizations or what the industry is looking for? And this used to be a problem. It continues to be a problem even in MSME and MFI, which are all very big employees, essentially, of people who are just passing out of the school or passing out of the college, actually. So that mismatch is something that I think that does exist even today. And there are different organizations and even government entities are doing very many things to address it. But that is, apart from the discovery, this is a really big problem that everyone is dealing with in terms of how do we fill this? How do we, first of all, understand what the gap is, essentially, right? And then how do you then address that gap, I think. So before we can sort of get into the details of what this gap is and what is that different missions are, to the extent that I am aware of, are doing. But I think maybe I can stop here and then also go to other people and understand what their take on the problem itself is, as a size of the problem, as well as what are the opportunities that is available to us to, as we embark and say, let's solve for this, let's do a skill-a-thon, what are we solving for, essentially, right?
So thanks, Aruna, for bringing that out, because I think you're right that there are many different problems in this space, right? And zeroing in on or putting a spotlight on a few of them, along with looking at the size of it, can be, one of the things that we do here. So Ratish, would you like to come in with your take on this?
Sure, Gaurav, and it's a pleasure to be with Neeraj and Aruna on this discussion. So we've had, my experience in skilling has come from 5 different spaces. I want to share that first before I highlight how I see the problem. We've had a chance to work on the supply side. We worked with non-profit organizations, for-profit players in helping them skill people for jobs. Yeah. We've also had a chance to work on the demand side, where we've actually worked with people like the Tatas and the Birlas and other companies and helping them attract talent for the jobs that they are hiring for. We've also worked at the ecosystem level, where we're actually helping people match the supply and the demand, right? Like organizations like Baba Job that used to exist, where they enabled informal worker job matching platforms. We've looked at the ecosystem, saying how can collaborative initiatives happen? And finally, contributed to aspects of policy as well. And I think across all of this, Gaurav, I think the one thing that stood out for me is that our imagination of the skilling landscape in India is often skewed because of people around us, right? Like we are all people who went to college, got a degree, went for a job interview, got selected, got PF, Social Security, and then did our jobs. But that's 8% of India's population, right? 92% of India's population is actually informal workers, right? And so we, Aruna said this number on 3%, so this 8% is only people who actually have a formal job, go for an interview, get selected. The rest of them are all working in setups that are largely informal. There is no very limited social security of anything, and there is no job certificate, there is no skill certificate, etc. Right? And for the longest time, we've been trying to make the informal markets formal markets everywhere, right? But for a country of 1.4 billion people, I think one of the things that we have to accept is that informality is going to remain in India for a very long time to come. And so the question for me always has been, how do you recognize skill and talent in an informal landscape? How do you actually help somebody understand that this person has cut the hair of like 1 million people, for example, in his life? This person's actually worked in your 5-star hotel and actually helped in plumbing, right? Those things don't come with job certificates today, but are immensely valuable skills, which are very informally handed over and talked about today in the ecosystem. And I truly believe that the opportunity and the challenge that we are facing is for the 92% of the 1.4 billion people today, how can we provide a way where their experience, the kind of work they have done, any informal training that they have received can actually be recognized and monetized in a working economy, right? Because then good people start to get better value. And when that happens, a flywheel kicks off, right? Then people start doing good work, they get better because they know that there is value at the end of it, because otherwise we're all swimming in this lake of mediocrity for a very long time. And for me, that is really the opportunity and the promise that I see.
Excellent point, Ratish, because, I think you brought in a very interesting angle to this, right? Which is we all keep looking at the number of people who come into, the job stream by virtue of their education and background. But what about those who come into this by virtue of their experience, which has no formal standing of its own, and hence their ability to kind of monetize that? Very, very interesting. And I'll probably come back to you to probe further in this, but just wanted to hear some, initial comments from Neeraj, especially when he looks at it from the perspective of how to look at it from the lens of school leadership and what schools can promote in terms of bringing to the table around this.
Thanks, Gaurav. Again, wonderful to be here. So we have been in the education leadership space for the last 5 years. And I think, again, scale has always been a question. I think both Ratish and Aruna did talk about it. Just India's education ecosystem, public school itself, we're looking at 1.5 million schools catering to 200+ million children across the country, right? The scale is humongous, and the future in whatever capacity we talk of India lies within these schools and what happens within these schools. Also, in context of opportunities, what we have seen, especially with education, has been that innovation has been the focus of education. Identifying how innovative solutions can come has always, in some capacity, has always been part of the schooling system itself. Over the last couple of years, we've realized that I think two pieces. One, definitely an opportunity to transform the way we look at capacity building at scale. Today, if you look at many sectors, there is humongous focus given in the idea of trainings, in the idea of workshops. I'm not just talking about education, I'm talking about different sectors. And you go to any sector, you will see n number of departments, n number of people really looking at the idea of trainings, workshops in a very cascaded manner happening across. What we realized is an opportunity for us to really move from this to an idea of mentoring itself. I think that for the last 2 years, especially, we've seen as a humongous piece. There exists enough wisdom, there exists enough experience within sectors, within systems that are not necessarily leveraged, to the best of abilities. I can talk about it in context of education. We've seen amazing school leaders do great work, but never recognized and never presented as potential mentors to other peers. So one, I think in context of discovery and in context of skilling, uh, how do we move from this typical notion of cascaded trainings and workshops to this idea of community driven mentoring that can enable the best of practices to be shared across? And again, we are trying to see how this can happen in education for sure, but I see its relevance across, right? The ability of anyone in this sector to demonstrate their mentoring abilities, to demonstrate their ability to be experts, from their experiences, and also make that as a mechanism of being recognized in the whole process. So mentoring as an idea, and how mentoring as a community idea, again, I think there's great opportunities there. And second, in context of especially education and skilling, we believe that leadership goes hand in hand with these two words, right? It is how do we bring this notion that anyone who can contribute to this whole ability of mentoring and ability of bringing skilling as an important piece, consider themselves as a leader. So again, leadership and bringing focus in leadership as an integral element to anyone who's in the sector, again, that's another big idea that we've been able to think of. Typical systems, especially when you look at education ecosystem, not everyone really thinks of themselves as a leader, right? They're bogged down by 100 administrative things. They might consider themselves as a manager in some capacity, but never acknowledge themselves as a leader. So the other big opportunity is how do we bring leadership into forefront, and how do we make this a very system-driven initiative, so that it's not necessarily an innovative external solution that you're looking at, but something that lies within the system that can help things done. So community-driven participation and mentoring is one of the biggest opportunities that we see, not just in education, but in other sectors as well.
Right. So, Neeraj, in a way, you're putting the spotlight on the fact that how do you discover, leaders who are strong, right? Because they've been accredited, and hence, you can easily find them as mentors to take you forward in that journey. And how community can play a role in terms of being able to find them, as well as being able to leverage them in the context of what they do. How many more can surface in this context with the recognition of the work that they are doing in the space, and what they are doing towards taking things forward, and with examples of leadership that they kind of bring to the table. So I think that's a good set of opening comments that we have had around what this really means, and I think it's time to really unpack this a little bit further. So Aruna, I can come back to you in the context of the perspective that you brought in around there being a clear demand supply mismatch, right? And I think you spoke about the gap, right? So can you unpack that a bit in terms of, for all of us to understand that what's really the set of issues over there, and how to really look at it?
Sure. But I would also, while I do this, I would also like to take on a couple of things that Ratish and Neeraj sort of like surfaced actually. Absolutely important points, like when Ratish is saying that what happens to all this experience if you're in an informal sector, you have learned in different places, and then what happens to this experience? Nobody has any. One is that we are saying discoverability. The second is that there's no visibility. Nobody even knows that what is that skill that you have acquired actually. Even if you ask this person to articulate it, can they say that, like somebody could say that I worked in a hospital actually, right? But what did you do in that hospital actually? So one of the things, like I said, we have been working with Harambee at South Africa. One of the things that they are doing is that instead of trying to capture the role of somebody, like saying that I was an administrator or I was a receptionist at somewhere, they are trying to capture the skills essentially. So rather than saying like, what does it mean to be a hotel receptionist, right? What are the skills that you're acquiring? It could be that you're acquiring some amount of facilitation skills. Maybe you're fairly good at English. Maybe you have about 10 skills, and maybe your 5 or 6 of them could be used in a completely different industry, in a completely different job itself. So generally the idea is there is a role, right? Like, you're applying for, so that you're always saying this role, so you can go and take the same role somewhere else essentially, right? But it is very fungible. It can be very fungible if you make it to be. But for that to happen, instead of taking a very role-based view on what can a person do, what they are trying to do is that can we take a very skill-based, and which means that you have to break it down and saying these are the skills that they have applied, so that they have acquired over a period of time, and then try and give some sort of an accreditation or validation for those skills, essentially having these, just-in-time tests or this or that, some sort of a certification essentially. So then when we are, that kind of connects back to the demand supply gap that we are talking about. So when some other industry comes and says, this is the person that I'm looking for, because they are still talking the language of saying, this is the role that I'm trying to sort of like, recruit for, you can sort of break it down and say that these are the skills that this role requires. I have someone who has maybe 7 out of these 10 skills that you're looking for. So then when we are saying, how do I fill this gap and how do I train for, then you know exactly what you're training for, rather than saying, I will train for a role, rather than saying, I will train for the gap actually. So that's a very interesting way of how do we break down these gaps? We keep saying there is a mismatch, but do we have visibility into what is the mismatch actually? Is it an English skill? Is it a digital skills? Is it communication skills? What exactly is the gap? The understanding of that and breaking that down could be a very useful thing, or something that can be attempted. So one of the things that not just them, even Revive is doing is trying and defining a registry of what do you mean by this skill actually. If you say that someone is a plumber, what does it mean to be a plumber? And are there gradations? Are you a grade A plumber, grade 2 plumber, grade 3 plumber? And what does it mean? So somebody who's saying that I worked in, say, like Taj Hotel as a plumber, the kind of plumbing skills that they have is likely to be much different or much higher than someone else maybe who's doing it more in like in an apartment or like in a neighborhood essentially, right? So can we have a universal or somewhat of a standardized understanding of what does this mean to have a skill? And also, I'm sure like some of you may be aware of it, that in Europe and all, they have a train for sustain, which has a registry actually. I mean, that is something that's a somewhat of a platform building exercise, right? To say that can we have a common understanding, common lexicon, and a common registry of what does it mean to have this skill? Can we define it actually? And then when we have this conversation with, say, from the supply side saying that this is what I want, then it can be a much more of a targeted conversation saying, is this something that we can train for? And even for the organizations to do it, like for instance, in most of these many organizations, not just like, MFI or MSME, many organizations, they do train, they do a very intense training for most of these people that they are hiring right out of a school or even a college, because there are a set of skills that even at the start of the career is missing actually at that point of time, right? So can we understand deeply before we even say that there is a gap? Can we break it down and say, what does that gap mean to different people? And can we have a standardized understanding of that gap essentially, right? And the second thing that Neeraj was talking about was, mentorship, and can we move from a training into a mentorship, which is fantastic. I think all of us are sort of like, there is somewhat of an understanding that that's what we have to move towards. But then again, what does it mean, right? What does it mean to say, like, can I should mentor somebody? And one of the things could be that many people are doing in the skilling space is that, can we take a very life cycle approach towards skilling actually, right? When someone enters, they have a certain amount of skills and they don't have a certain amount of skills. And today we are talking about, these side gigs or like, these gig economy and all that. But when you have to convert that into a entire, like, say a career, actually, what kind of skills do you need? So if based on where the particular person is at their life cycle, what kind of skilling is necessary? Is it a gap skilling that we need to do? Is it an upskilling that we need to do? Or it can be completely different, like for instance, organizations like industry, organizations like Revive and many others. I mean, I'm sure Ratish and others would be familiar with a lot more, where they are moving from saying, okay, you are someone who is say like you're making something, you're an artist, like you're a craftsperson, you're making something, and your relationship so far to the market has been only that of a seller actually. But can we skill them into saying that what kind of a skill do you need to acquire to move into a micro small enterprise essentially, right? So that requires a complete different set of. So if we can take a life cycle approach towards it, what are we solving for can become a little bit clearer, saying that these are maybe some areas that some of the missions which are interested in solving for can look at actually. And again, like Neeraj mentioned, one of the challenges also that there are at least we have 20 government bodies which are trying to do some sort of a skilling actually. So, but is there even a visibility for everyone to see what is that? I'm sure there will be some amount of duplication of work, but is there a platform where everybody can see, or can they themselves see as to what is that the other person is sort of like doing, which can lead to a lot of like shared infrastructure and collaboration and co-creation, those kinds of things actually, which are all at a little bit of a infrastructure level, but that could really pave the way for other missions which are close to the field to come and do what they do best essentially.
I think Aruna, that's very well articulated, because in a way you kind of touched upon the point that Ratish made earlier, that there's a huge informal workforce which is out there. And hence, what can lead to formalization, at least of the skills that they have, and the avenues that it opens up for them in that context. And I think you spoke about 4 or 5 different aspects of it, like moving from roles to skill-based, opportunity in terms of jobs that people get. How do you accredite them for the skills that they possess? How do you show them what else do they need to do? How do they help them be skilled on those particular aspects, and so on and so forth. So I think very, very interesting thoughts and take on that. Ratish, because it's kind of linked to the point that you made, how do you look at that? What else do you think maybe the factors to keep in mind as one looks at somewhere, formalization of the skilling as such across the entire diaspora?
Yeah. So, Gaurav, I always joke that all of us live our lives to impress an unknown recruiter, right? School mein kitna mark liya because some recruiter has to be impressed. Kahan pe padha tumne? Because in the end, there is a person who's looking at our life in a piece of paper and is evaluating that, yaar, Bitspulani hai, to matlab, theek hai, let's bring him in. And it's deciding our future, right? And the observability of our competency today is standardized for a recruiter's life to be easy, right? It's a sad way to look at our lives, but it's true, right? And I think the big lesson there, Gaurav, is that it is very difficult to change what the market values. Right? You might as well just structure the supply to what the market values, and rather than trying to say, I'll change the way the market values it. And which is a sad reality why a lot of 10th, 12th class graduates are infinitely smarter than me, for example, may not get the same opportunities as a college graduate like me, right? And the reason I'm bringing that up is that when we think about skilling the informal workforce, I think this is an important lesson. Because there is a thinking around, and NSDC was built on this to say, hey, we will build these skill levels, we will put this training, we'll put the accreditation. In the end, the recruiter did not care about an NSDC rate, right? So because of which, they haven't been able to build a premium on the skilling that NSDC provided, because they wanted to change the way a recruiter hires for informal talent, and that recruitment challenge never shifted, and because of which it didn't have value. So the question when we approach this problem again of making informal workers get value for their experiences, how do we integrate that into the recruiter's thinking, right? Because if you say you are plumbing level 7, the recruiter like, I don't know what is level 7, how do I know it is true, etc. But if you say the same person, this person worked in Taj for 5 years, they'll be like, to banda sahi hai, right? Yep. So, because that is the way we understand talent. So I think for anyone who's looking to solve the problem of making informal workers get premium for their experience, I think it's important to recognize how market values and understands talent and work backwards, rather than create, at least in the short term, a taxonomy that they believe the market will adopt, because market always adopts taxonomies last, right? So it's very important to say, and I remember Shankar Marwada once explained to me saying, anyone who's fixed air conditioners in Koramangala 4th block is wanted, because there's a lot of expensive air conditioners in Koramangala 4th block, right? Because that's the kind of market validation that they're looking for. And I think knowing that, I think is very, very critical. Second, for example, what Urban Company and others have figured out is peer reviews and ratings, right? Are there ways to create models where it is not an abstract taxonomy, but it's actually customer feedback? But I think thinking through how decisions of hiring and decisions of premium are taken in the market and working backwards rather than assuming a taxonomy, I think is going to be very, very critical. I think that's one point I wanted to make. I know time is short, so I'll keep it here, but happy to add to it if you have follow-up questions.
No, I think that's really excellent, because in a way, you're putting a spotlight on the fact that recruiting has, happened in a certain way in the past, right? And it's probably time for it to evolve. And for that to evolve, there is a change which is needed, both in terms of, how the recruiter looks at really, attracting talent. And I'm sure, if one talks to the recruiters, one will see humongous number of challenges that they have to deal with, especially the big talent crunch that happened in the context of, what happened during COVID, to looking at what is the new taxonomy for recruiting, which is very recruitment friendly. And I think that having its own impact in the way the resume is brought across, right? And I think that's an important aspect, because our resumes cannot continue to be what they use to show up as what they were in the past, to something that they really need to evolve to. I think really, really great thoughts in terms of, giving it shape and direction. So Neeraj, kind of linking it to the mentorship idea that you spoke about, right? Have you seen evolution in the way people look at mentorship, right? And hence, what is it changing on the ground in terms of what people look for in mentors vis-a-vis what has been the case in the past?
I think I want to connect this to also what I think Ratish was mentioning. It's very difficult to move a status quo from where it is, especially when you're looking at systems, right? Like I think when he was talking about recruiters and how it's so difficult to change, let's say, a certain thing in recruiters' mind. I think one in general, when we've seen components like skilling or components like capacity building being introduced to large-scale systems, I think one fundamental learning that we have seen is to take this at a very minimal intervention level, right? Do one thing at a time that can really go across. Just an example, for example, when I think about mentoring, you go today and you meet many departments, they will talk about mentoring in close association with age, right? A senior teacher, a senior professional is considered a mentor, but high chances, let's say, someone young, but someone who's very entrepreneurial may not necessarily be official mentor in whatever capacity, right? And this also goes back to, I think, when Aruna, you were talking about how do you present yourself as, what are your qualifications and how do you really put your skills out there? I think one shift that we are seeing actively come up right now is this notion of who really a mentor is, right? And what is mentoring really associated with? This notion of not necessarily sticking to components like age alone in the larger definition of better skills or better mentors, but also people who might have done great acts of change, great acts of actual work on ground. So the definition of components like capacity building, mentoring are moving to many other components being added in. I think that definitely has been, one shift that we've seen come up slowly in some capacity, in different forums across. The way, let's say, mentors get discovered across platforms, right? How do you think about what components, what kind of elements really come in there? So I think that there is a discussion going on about how do you think about mentor discoverability, right? What is it that I want to discover a mentor as, and how do you come and position yourself as a mentor? That definitely has been, I think, one big shift. And second, I think skilling, mentoring is also, we've seen that has a certain close connotation with the idea of recognition, the idea of validation. Today, especially when you look at large scale systems like schooling, one of the most important aspects that a lot of school leaders, a lot of teachers are seeking is the idea of being validated in some capacity. That I'm doing great work, but often not, it doesn't really come out, recognized in any capacity. In such situations, the idea of being able to mentor someone, the idea of being able to build someone else's skill because of my experiences becomes an easy way of validation. Right. So I think what also we are seeing is this, like I was mentioning, this community driven, mentoring, skilling, peer, sharing that is also being recognized as this idea of recognition for school leaders. So I think two big notions that we are looking at, evolving in the space of mentoring and peer learning in systems like education has been, one, the idea of going small, thinking those very smaller pieces that can trigger much more of a trickle effect, right? How do you bring the element of change in a mentor profile? How do you look at, a mentor-mentee interaction to not necessarily be a mentor-driven engagement, but a mentee-driven engagement? How do you look at better interactions? It's not just about how many sessions have I done, but can platforms start talking about what was the quality of these interactions? How are skills being thought through? And the second, like I mentioned, how is the act of mentoring or the act of bringing, a certain component of skill development conversation in anyone becoming recognized as a recognition mechanism for people? So there, I think there lies a great opportunity in connecting, the ability to be presented as a great leader with the way you are contributing to the largest skilling endeavor in the country. I mean, these are two things that we have seen in education really come up in conversations and experiences, in the way people are thinking education interventions also in general.
Right. Really interesting, because here again, Neeraj, you're speaking about looking at how to change the definition of mentoring in itself, right? And attach it with the recognition and how it can happen at a community level in its new avatar or in its new definition. So fascinating. I think all three of you kind of, speaking about a bit of a need for a paradigm shift that's needed in the space for it to evolve. So I think this is a good segue for us to kind of, also now speak about some of the stories that you've seen on the ground, right? Kind of bringing to light some of the challenges that you're speaking about. So how can we see it in terms of the stories that you see on the ground in the work and the experience that you have, or the things that you come across? It can be in any order. I mean, who would like to take that?
I can go first, Gaurav.
Sure.
I'm not sure if this is the kind of story you're looking for, but I have two experiences I want to share.
Sure.
Which sort of signifies why credentialing is very, very important, So I was once working on an assignment where we had a chance to observe users real time on an informal job matching platform, which is where informal workers come into our online platform, apply for jobs, and then then see how they can follow up, etc. Because we wanted to see where in the funnel do they actually engage, drop, etc. So typically, how you and I would sort of look for a job is we would look for a role. So let's say technology, software engineer, look for software engineer roles, identify which ones are there, and then apply for those roles because those are our skills, right? And I was seeing this, and this is live, a user logging in, and believe it or not, selected HSR layout. And then selected a location, and then said cook, apply, security, apply, house help, apply, everything apply, right? Because in their minds, they could be any of these people. They could be a cook, they could be a house help, they could be security. They only wanted to make sure it is HSR because they don't have to travel too far. And part of the reason why I'm sharing this story is because for them, becoming a better cook is not an aspiration. Because if you're a better cook, it's not like you get better salary. Like even when we select cooks for our own homes, we're like, if you're going to come for this amount of time, for this amount of dishes, I'll give you this amount of money. And for me, that was the paradigm saying, how can we get a person to build an aspiration to become a better cook, which then will get them better salary, right? And for me, that's an example of a story that's always stuck in my mind saying, because it changes the way I looked at job searching. right? Which is where a person's optimizing for bus fare and location rather than optimizing for getting better skills, better credentials to actually become better at cooking, for example, though, which is what we would expect. The second story I want to share again, which explains why credentialing in my mind is important, is we were part of the telecom industry's work when the telecom industry started growing in India, where the licenses were given. And you know this, I'm sure, is that telecom is net new as an industry, right? All the people who came from telecom actually came either from the army, because they had to build these massive projects which had to sort of be set up, or they came from FMCG because they wanted to work on customer experience. So which means that the set of skills that we assume are vertically integrated, that you start in FMCG, you end up as a CEO of an FMCG company, are actually extremely transferable. Because if you're good at customers, you're going to look at all customer industries. If you look at construction, you're going to look at all the construction and real estate type of industries, etc. And you actually cut across. And we realize that unlike what we normally think, jobs across sectors are very, very transferable. Right? That today who's in FMCG, tomorrow can be in telecom. Today who's in the army can be tomorrow in telecom. From telecom, he can go to solar power, because they're all projects, because they involve massive development at short times. And increasingly now, and this is part of the recent work we're doing, Gaurav, that green jobs is becoming a huge focus. And a lot of what green jobs wants are not new talent. They want existing talent in new roles. And today they're actually building new language to say, I need somebody who's an electrician, because it's green jobs and there's solar. Most of solar folks are looking for construction folks, because they need to set up these plants and they need plumbers, etc. So in the future, I do believe as green jobs and other things become more important, you will have to find this cross-industry search of jobs that I think will become very, very real. And finally end with this last story, which is more of an individual. So we ran a program called Select Her, which helped girls get premium jobs, and I remember that we had selected a set of girls in Bombay. We had trained them and we got them jobs. There was a girl who had come from an underprivileged background, and she finally got a job. And we called her back after 3 months and we said, where do you want to go? And she said, I want to move into the airline industry. I said, we placed you in retail. Why do you want to do an airline? And she said, sir, kahan bhi jao, it's the same things. You want English, you want etiquette, you want ethics, right? And any consumer-facing industry is pretty much the same thing. And if you look at credentialing, for me, that is credentialing, right? English, etiquette, ethics. Whichever industry you go, it's relevant. And how do we create language like this that enables people career pathways, I think will be very, very useful. So I'll pause with that.
No, again, excellent set of points, Ratish. And I think that's quite linked to what Aruna was also mentioning earlier, right? That how do you move away from role-based jobs to actually looking at, what are the skills that people have, and look at, monetizing them, right? So that by the use of credentials, so that one can fit into different types of roles because of the skills that they possess, because skills are easy to transfer. Roles may not be easily transferable across industries, but skills are easily matchable and transferable across industries. And hence what credentialing can play as a role to formalize and monetize in terms of the skills that people really have. Excellent. Aruna, how do you link that to
I don't think I have a lot of story, but I just want to say a couple of things. One is that when Neeraj was talking about, how the mentoring works today, I couldn't but help that, 27 years back when I started working, it can be the simplest of idea. And then if you say to not all senior people, but at least there was a sizable number of them who would immediately tell you, your age is my experience. And I would be quite confounded by that statement saying, what does it even mean actually, right? But it was quite common. People would say things like that there was such a you kind of automatic assumption that, I am older than you and therefore I kind of have more good. So it's kind of good to know that we have moved from there to a very peer-driven and a mentee-driven sort of like a mentorship role actually. In terms of story, more than a story, I think one of the things that's really sort of like stayed with me is I used to sort of like when I came back from the US, I used to consult in a organization that some of my friends had set up in Chennai called VSESH, and it used to be a skilling mission which worked with people with disability actually. right? And at that time when we had started, we were just sort of looking at mostly working with people with the vision disability and hearing disability and stuff like that. And two things that that kind of like really stood out in that experience of like talking to a lot of the people that we wanted to skill for and all that is, there was this one girl and a boy who wrote to us from Trichy. Somehow they had gotten that thing, and they said we want we want to somehow like get a little bit skilled and this and that and everything. And then we said fine. We even somehow managed some grant and all that, and decided to bring them to Chennai and get them some place to stay. And then when it came to sort of like the D-Day, we realized that the girl had not come actually, because there is so much of like, there is a certain amount of social, discomfort with the idea of a young girl traveling all the way with a disability to a strange sort of like a city that they are not familiar with, that how much ever, in fact, she took more enthusiasm to make it happen. And she was so aware that she couldn't come, which was so heartbreaking actually, because it's not even that she said, this is just not going to happen for me. As long as it's going to happen to my brother, that's going to be okay. So then we started doing, how do we move it closer, right? Rather than saying, this is where I am, you come and train here, to say that, okay, how do we find and maybe move it closer to where they are? Because otherwise we are definitely going to leave out the minorities from the minorities who are going to be denied those opportunities, because it's not something that even with our best of intentions, we kind of don't live in that world. So we don't even think about it. And then when we experience it, it's such a shock actually. And then the second thing is we had like, we had an office on the second floor or third floor, because that was the cheapest office we could find. And as days roll by, 6 months, 8 months, we started also, a lot of organizations started saying that, we can work with neurodivergent and all that, but we could never bring them into the office because the lift will not allow for a wheelchair actually, right? And it is, and the most, the hardened of them, the ones who really, really would do anything to get that, they would get actually physically lifted every day, and it is a huge favor that, you feel like you're asking such a huge favor of like some of the people that you're like helping you with. So how do we even with the best of intentions, we sort of like, there are so many people or so many problems that's not visible to us. So how do we keep that in mind, even when we say that, we are a very small section and we want to focus on a larger section? Even in those larger sections, there are people who are definite minorities, and how do we keep them in our minds while we try and solve for some of these problems could be very important to make sure that it's, again, we don't have to, every time we say inclusion and then we leave out a large swath of population and then take additional initiatives to include, rather than, at the design stage, at the thinking stage, at the policy stage, if we can think about what does it mean to reach everyone, that could be something. It was a very harsh, almost shameful that when we realized that, we didn't even think about it. It was quite a hard feeling, but that's what it is. It's not normal to us, so therefore we do not think about it, and that's kind of like quite a little bit unintelligent of us, I think, actually.
So that's a very, very important point, Aruna, because I think if right at the onset, like you mentioned, we keep inclusion, accessibility, these kind of factors in mind, I don't think we'll make the kind of mistakes that we do. And hence a very, very important story that you shared in this context, which is upon us, as people who are working the space to take care of. Neeraj, would you like to share any stories or experiences in this context?
I think when one thing that kept coming to my mind, and I was trying in connecting it to a lot of conversations that I've had with people that we work with. There's a huge population that still connects skilling to academic certification. And I'm talking about not people here, who are confident to talk about, let's say, I can maybe tell here are 5 things that I've learned through the job, that are my skills. But I've not had one experience, maybe let's say engaging with an Anganwadi worker or a teacher, or let's say someone working, let's say in the women and child welfare, or in, let's say, a Hasirudala cleanliness drive worker, talking about skills as the most obvious thing that they know, right? It's an often perception that I may not have learned enough, and therefore I don't know what my skill sets are. So there's no active confidence about a huge population of people working in spaces and systems like this, where they don't see they're not they don't actively call out skills in the first place, but what they do call out are on job experiences, acts of change, acts of courage, acts of demonstrating skill in their life experiences as the most obvious way of talking, right? I have had many conversations where school leaders have talked about how the for me it may have been a very easy way of abstracting and identifying it with, let's say, a specific skill, but they have talked about doing great staff meetings, doing great community drives. All of these are essentially skills that have come through the process. So one, I think, in general, what I've seen from all of these experiences, one, how do you build the right culture of confidence and the right culture of even speaking about skills in a huge set of the sectors that we're working right? Maybe skilling is not the easiest of the term that may not, let's say, go to education, public schools. Is there a way we demystify this idea into something very simple so that more and more people feel confident about what they know well and how they can project it? I think there lies an important question. Today, a lot of school leaders don't feel they're equipped enough or confident enough to tell that here are 5 things that I know and that I can really talk about, right? So how do we really build that culture? I think was one big piece that continue to keep ringing a bell. And second is the idea of skilling on the go. Today, especially when you look at workers, teachers, many of these professionals, they may not necessarily take the time out to get an academic certification or get a get a certification of having attended, let's say, a capacity building program. But how do we think about credentialing that works in close association with on the job go, right? Every act of change, every act of demonstration, how can platforms talk about what skills have they demonstrated? So I think another experience for me has been this whole notion of saying, how do you capture demonstrated skills of school leaders, of teachers, of workers through the act of things that they have done, and not necessarily rely it on how do you think smart credentialing, right? Credentialing beyond the certification, credentialing beyond a demonstration of, let's say, a certain outcome, a credentialing based on active change, a credentialing based on consistency, right? If a school leader has consistently shown effective staff meetings, that is a skill. So how do you bring that visibility to systems so that they can be credentialed? So I was also, from my experience, I think culture, confidence, demystifying the idea of skilling, and smart credentialing. I mean, I could think of all of this when I was thinking of, let's say, a school leader that I met, in my experience. Again, this is what I could think of.
So, Neeraj, that's fascinating. I mean, it's a completely different take on what do you credential people for. And of course, we all know the conventional thing, but given who you really are is a function of what you really do well. And hence, and there are a set of things, which today one may not be getting credentialed for, and hence, bringing that about, besides the fact that all of us are learning lifelong. Right. So how that keeps getting enhanced and so on and so forth. Now, with this, let me take a couple of audience questions before I ask for your closing comments. And in fact, I love one of these, which has been posted and it's kind of doing the rounds as well, which is with ChatGPT coming into play. Right. How is that expected to change the world of skilling in terms of what people do today versus what they are expected to do in the future? I know, tough one, but your take on it.
I could go, I think Neeraj, you probably want to add as well, but I can go first, Gaurav. And I think this is related to a study that the World Economic Forum did 4 years ago as well, where they essentially said, even before ChatGPT was invented, that 60% of the jobs that people are going to graduate to don't even exist today, right? And I have a 12-year-old son, and watching him being in school as well, gives me an indication of what I think are the skills we're going to do. I think, in my mind, the 3 foundational skills that I think differentiate people and their ability to get things done is A, your ability to work with other people. So great emotional strength, emotional quotient, ability to sort of deal with, success and failure and all sorts of characters well in your life, I think is going to be a significant chunk, number 1. 2, I think communication skills, like articulating what you're thinking effectively, I think now more than ever, both in written and oral forms are going to become critical. ChatGPT can tell you, what you need to say, but how you say it, I think is going to be still a very, very important quality. And the third thing that I think will become even more important now, thanks to innovations like ChatGPT, is ability to demystify complexity. Because any standard question that an AI thing can answer by reading a report is already going to be answered, right? But the unshapen, undefined problems, I think defining them and accepting and embracing complexity, I think is going to be very, very critical. In my mind, anything that our education system can provide in terms of enabling people to work better with other people, enabling people to communicate their ideas effectively, and enabling people to deal with, what engineers call NP problems, right, are going to be very, very important because everything else is going to be taken care of by somebody else or the other.
Yeah. And that's a paradigm shift. Aruna, Neeraj, any comment from your side about that, the question?
No, I think Ratish did a very good job of summarizing that. I think these are the skills, people skills, communication skills. And I mean, someone else was saying that ChatGPT may be here, but the differentiating factor would be how do you prompt it actually, right? I mean, if you ask generically, it can say multiple things, but what kind of a context do you give it and how do you prompt it is really going to differentiate between whether you put in your intelligence there or not, actually. And I think I also loved what Neeraj had to say about the smart credentialing. I think it's very something that we, it never gets accounted for, but I think recruitment we sort of like look for it as an X factor, but I don't think it's ever been formally recognized as something that could be credentialed. And I think that's a great idea, actually.
Great. So that brings me to the next question from the audience, and some of these are getting posed to me so that I can see. So I've selected another one, which is how do you look at the role of collaboration or partnership in the context of quite a few challenges that we spoke about? Again, I leave that to any of you to kind of take it up and answer that.
I mean, there's no other way. I think it's a non-negotiable approach in today's world. I mean, one, just by the nature of scale, there is no way that one organization sitting in one corner can ever do this. I think just going by that premise that the scale demands people to come together. There's no other way to do this. I think that obviously is the first piece, just in terms of how this could work. And second, I think we've spent a lot of time trying to understand what collective action could really look like. I think there is wisdom, there's so much wisdom in the community. I think the more people are able to come together and discuss and talk, I think, it will really go ahead. I think it also connects to a very interesting experience I had about ChatGPT. Yesterday itself, we were recruiting someone and we were just talking about, what is the next big thing that you think is happening in the space of tech and collaboration. And very interestingly, someone said, because of ChatGPT, students may get answers easily, but it will prompt them to ask more questions, which has never happened before. So I'm also thinking that as an important piece that's coming to how we're looking at collective action, right? More people coming together, more questions asked, more things to think of. And like I mentioned, the scale demands people to come together. There is no other way. There is absolutely no other way that people can do this together. And no matter what we say, how different every context is, there are common building blocks that needs to emerge across, right? And for that, you obviously have to come together. So while diversity exists, there's so much that can happen when people come together in finding unifying guidelines, principles, platforms, technology that can really help move things.
Great. I think we're at the top of the hour. Unfortunately, I cannot take any more audience questions, but I will ask, for closing remark. And for the closing remark, let me actually frame it like a bit of a question, which also helps, our audience, especially those who are participating in the hackathon, Skill-a-thon. What will be your favorite challenge statement that our participants can work on in the context of the Skill-a-thon, especially focused, between discovery of opportunities and credentialing? If you were to look at, what will be your favorite challenge statement that you would like to pose at them?
Okay, I can go first. I think two-part answer to that question. I think Once a social investor told me there are people who go for the greatest need or the greatest opportunity, and that's a choice that people always make, right? So my general guidance to the people is actually you will be tempted to go for the greatest need, but go for the greatest opportunity. And what I mean by that is an idea like credentialing is so new. What we need today is an opportunity where the demand is there, the supply is there, the enabling environment is there, but observability can create value. And if you can show that, and if you can show that for even a fairly large but relatively easy problem, it gets easier to replicate it, rather than picking the most complex problem and saying, hey, listen, how do I solve for this, etc. So one part of the answer is what will excite me is then if someone is able to identify the greatest opportunity rather than the greatest need, I think that will be exciting because we need wins. And once wins, they sort of trigger more wins and we solve more problems. Second is more what type of problem would I want people to solve, which will excite me personally. The amount of people today who migrate seasonally in India is staggering, right? Like as families. And the sad reality is that they migrate and live in unlivable situations, but actually take no money back home when they go back. So it's sort of an exercise in survival to go through some of this. If there is a way credentialing can enable seasonal and perpetual migrants to actually get money that can stop the next generation from becoming a distressed migrant, I think that can be a fantastic solution for this country, right? And I do believe credentialing has a lot to offer because you're essentially moving away from a social context where you have any equity to another social context where you have no equity, right? How can credential help a person through this journey? I think will be an amazing challenge to have somebody say.
Fascinating. Thank you, Ratish. Aruna, Neeraj?
Sure. I think if anyone who's working on it, if they can find out what is the point of irreversibility in the skilling, right? Actually, so because, post-COVID, we know that a lot more people lost jobs or like their skilling is not, whatever they have known is not in demand or they can't get it or whatever. So if they can work on something which will create a certain amount of irreversibility, right? Like you have skilled and then you're moving to the next stage and you are able to be resilient to the next thing that may happen. It could be a pandemic, it could be anything else, but you're not going to slide down, but at least be there actually. If that can be solved for, actually, that would be one interesting thing. And the second thing is, I completely agree with Neeraj when he says that, co-creation or collaboration, there is really no other way to do this actually. But still, we may all agree to that in principle, or not everybody may agree to it in principle. Maybe we are all, we are a bit of an echo chamber, so we are agreeing to it, but may not be everyone may not agree to it. So if that is what we believe very strongly, then can someone create, it can be a platform, it can be anything, any kind of a unifying ecosystem which essentially understands what is the incentive for people to collaborate actually, right? Unless that is provided, people who don't see the value in it, they still continue to not see the value in it actually. So if we can see the value, then what will that ecosystem offer for people who today may not see that value, and therefore they will be much more willing to participate actually.
Fascinating. Thank you, Aruna. Neeraj?
I think one is, again, need-based credentialing for complex systems like education, women and child welfare, each department having their own, how do we identify the best way to credential skill and talent? One, definitely there. Second is the idea of marketplaces. How do we really build marketplaces for domains across? The right marketplace where people can come, solve together, learn together, collaborate together and move ahead. How do you build it for very specific themes and really build it across? So marketplace and credentialing for complex systems and complex themes, I think are two very exciting ideas that I can think of.
Great, that's awesome. So thank you so much, Ratish, Aruna, Neeraj, for a fascinating conversation. And I think this is just one of the things that we are doing. Probably there are many, many more that all of us need to mull over and think about, because as you all spoke about, I think the entire space needs a bit of a paradigm shift, right? But how do we go about doing it in a fashion that it can work at scale and it's exciting and enticing and yet linked to one of the greatest opportunities, like Rati spoke of. I think that's quite important. So thank you so much for being on the panel and sharing your wisdom and insights with everyone. Thank you to the audience as well for joining there, asking their questions, and listening to us talk about the experiences in the space. Just a quick reminder to everyone that our next panel discussion on some of the challenges associated with this space will be on 10th of February. And if anyone wants to discover and understand more about Skill-a-thon, the initiative, then the link for the same has been posted on the chat box. So you can click on the link and then get more information, or do reach out to us to fill you in further on that. With that, thank you everyone once again. Thank you to the panelists. Take care. Goodbye.